chosen as my warp thread. And the reason I know it makes a good warp thread is that I can pull on it really hard and it doesn't snap, it doesn't break. It's going to be under a lot of tension on the loom, so you need good strong yarn for your warp threads. You can use anything you want for the other direction. But for the warp threads, it needs to be very strong. In order to decide how long to make the warp threads, I pulled out an old scarf that's the length that I want, and I put it between these two chairs, and then added a little bit to make it a little longer than I want it to be, because it'll shrink up as I weave, and I can always trim off the excess. So I'm taking the yarn that I've chosen for my warp thread and winding it between the two chairs to get the length of yarn that I want for my scarf. Now when I'm finished and I have as many threads as I want, I'm going to cut one end, leave the other end folded. And in the next video, I'll show you what to do with them when we take them to the loom. To put the yarn on the loom, take one of the threads that you cut. Make sure the ends are even. And then loop the bent end over the prongs on the back of the loom and just drape it to the front of the loom. You can mix and match your warp threads, doesn't matter. As long as they're strong, you can use whatever you want. As you can see, I rarely have two of the same yarns next to each other coming off the prongs. I just like variety in mine. It's totally up to you what you do, but this is just to illustrate that anything goes. This is what the back of the prongs look like, where I've looped the threads over the back. Also notice that there are no empty slots. Every slot has a thread coming out of it. Now to just secure these threads so that they don't pop up off the prongs, I take an unrelated color of yarn and just weave it around the prongs to lock the threads down. Just in and out of the prongs. And I'll do the same with this end just to double lock them down. So now you can see that the turquoise thread is locking down the warp threads. When I'm warping my loom, I start at the middle of the loom and work out to the sides. And I've drawn a pencil line on the heddle as well as on the back of the loom. So I always line these pencil marks up before I start hanging my yarn. And then I start at the middle and work to the sides until the piece is as wide as I want it to be. Now, using this tool, little hook on the end, I'm going to reach through the holes and the slats in the heddle and pull the yarn through the heddle toward me. I'm taking the tool, poking it through the next opening, which in this case is a slot, taking the next yarn from the back, hooking the hook over the yarn, and then pulling the yarn through the opening. Through the hole to the next yarn, hooking it, pulling it through. And again, I started at the middle and I'm working my way to one edge, and then I'll do the other side going the other direction. Through the slot to the next yarn, pull it through, through the hole, next yarn, pull it through. And as you can see, I have different weights of yarns as well. You can mix and match as much as you want here. Through the slot to the next yarn. So all my yarns have been threaded through, and I'm going to just double check that I have something coming out of each opening, each hole, and each slot. Has something coming through it. I didn't skip any while I was threading them through. Now, depending on the kind of weaving you're doing, you might want holes in between, but I'm just making a simple over-under woven scarf, so I wanted to make sure that all of the openings have yarn coming through them. So all of the warp threads are coming from the back of the loom, going through the heddle, either into a hole or a slot, and then hanging down over the front of the loom. And I've turned the prongs on the front of the loom to face down so that they won't snag the yarn. Now we're going to roll the yarn up onto the loom, and it's helpful to keep tension on the threads. And notice the heddle is in the neutral position. It's in the middle of the 3 slots. And look how nicely the yarns lay on the newspaper. I'm using newspaper so that the yarns don't become tangled on each other as I roll them up. And when I get to the end of a newspaper, I'm just going to insert a new piece and keep rolling. It's helpful to comb the yarn with your fingers every so often, just to do a double check to make sure that it's hanging straight from the heddle and isn't caught on itself anywhere along the way. And again, double checking here that it's all laying nicely. I'm going to tighten the wing nuts. And now we will secure the threads on the front of the loom. Turning the prongs up. want my warp threads to come straight from the heddle to the front of the loom. So sometimes that means I need to put a thread in the same slot that there is already a thread. Don't worry about that. The important part is keeping this straight. These two are going to be in the same slot. That's perfectly fine. So all the yarns have been pulled through and secured in the front. Now, just like I did on the back of the loom, I am going to further secure them by weaving in and out of each slot another color of yarn over the top of this, just to secure it a little bit more. And the reason I use a different color is so that it is easy to remove later. I don't have to second guess myself about which one is the thread to remove to get my work off the loom. Okay, all the warp threads are on and have been secured. So now that I have set the yarns on this end of the loom and secured it with an unrelated color of thread, I'm going to wind a bit on this paper. Secure both ends of the loom. And now we can start weaving. Notice that there are 3 positions for the heddle to be located in. Neutral position, which is what we use when we thread the loom, and then when we're not working, when we're finished with weaving for the day, keep it in the neutral position. And also at the end of the day, loosen this so it's not under tension, so you're not stretching out your yarns for no reason. So now notice when I put the heddle in the top position, all of the yarn that's coming through the holes are raised. When I put the heddle in the lower position, all the yarns that are threaded through the slots will raise, and that's what makes it possible to weave. This is just a piece of cardboard that I've cut to fit here as a spacer. So I'm going to put the heddle in the lower position, insert my spacer, wrestle it down into here, then raise the heddle to the top position, and I can start weaving, and that'll allow room so that I'm not fighting with where my starting point is as I push the shuttle through. So I have my yarn wound on my shuttle, and I will give you a link to the video that I learned to do this on. I'm leaving quite a long tail. How many times this width? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 times the width of this is what I'm leaving, which is going to be too long, but rather too long than short. The reason for this long tail is that once we've woven a few inches, we're going to hem stitch the end using this tail as the line to hem stitch, and that just secures the weaving so it doesn't unmake once you cut the scarf off the loom and it's no longer under tension. And I will also give you a link to the video I use for when I do that. So now we are ready to weave. Leaving the tail off, double checking that the only yarn I'm going to pass the shuttle under is coming out of a hole, not a slot. Wrestle it down here. Take the Heddle and push it against my spacer bar, and now put it back in the lower hole. So then pass through, making sure that all of these yarns are coming out of a slot, not a hole. And I like to hold this and pull it through gently as I push down with the Heddle. Now back to the upper slot. The reason that I'm pulling gently as I push the Heddle against my weaving is that I want the sides to be straight. I don't want them to be going in and out like that, and I can manage that better if I'm doing it manually. So just a rule of thumb that I follow is when I'm coming from the right, the Heddle's in the high position. When I'm coming from the left, the Heddle's in the low position. So right high, left low. Now that I've woven about this much, maybe 3 inches, I am going to hem stitch the bottom with that tail that we left. Then I'll show you what that looks like. And again, I'll link you to a separate video where another lady explains how to do that. This is what the hem stitching looks like. It's just a nice finish at the end of my scarf. And now as I weave up and run out of space here for my shuttle to pass, I'm going to roll the scarf up on this end of the loom and unroll it from this end until we're finished. So now I'm finished weaving my scarf, and I've hem stitched the end, and now it's time to take it off the loom. And this is where it's helpful to have the non-matching color, so I can just easily pull up that tail so none of those are secured. Cut it off the loom, and then unwind it from this end and do the same thing at this end, and then trim my fringe, and my scarf is finished. The reason I know it will make a good warp thread is that I can pull on it as hard as I can, and it just snapped.